Like any other combat sport, sometimes a promoter will do their best to offer a layup to a budding star who could use a push. But every now and then, that move will backfire with truly disastrous consequences, leading to the type of shocking victories we're about to cover in this video.
How's that feel? Hey, I'm not surprised.
Junior dos Santos. When Junior dos Santos faced Fabricio Verdum in his first ever UFC outing, he was the underdog in the eyes of many. Verdum was a seasoned Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialist and had defeated some of the best heavyweights in the sport. Dos Santos, on the other hand, was untested, unproven, and didn't really have too much hype coming in. But what JDS did have was some insane power in his hands. And if you're looking for the exact moment this future legend of the division officially arrived, it's when he managed to find a home for his biggest punch on Verdum's chin just 80 seconds into the fight. Both men would, of course, go on to achieve great things and eventually capture UFC gold. But how were the UFC matchmakers supposed to know that they had just set up two future Hall of Famers this early on in their respective careers? Gabriel Gonzaga. In an effort to springboard the great Mirko into a run of form in his new home in the UFC, Gabriel Gonzaga was cast as the sacrificial lamb when he faced the fearsome striker in the UFC 70 main event. Krokop was already a legend in the world of MMA, known for his devastating kicks and knockout power. Gonzaga, on the other hand, was a relatively unknown fighter with a limited UFC record. However, Gonzaga was unfazed by the odds stacked against him. In the first round of their encounter, he managed to nail Krokop with his own technique, landing the perfect head kick on the greatest head kicker in the sport. In other words, this setup fight for one of the most popular heavyweights of all time ended up with Mirko getting, well, Krokopped by Gonzaga. A shock for the ages, and beyond that, one of the single best KOs in the history of mixed martial arts. Bryan Barberena. In the lead-up to their showdown, it seemed that Bryan Barberena was destined to be yet another easy fight for the highly touted prospect Sage Northcutt. Northcutt, with his chiseled physique and impressive karate background, was heavily favored to walk away with a dominant victory. And the UFC were very clearly pushing him as the next big thing. But as it turned out, his looks, style, and potential were not going to be enough to see him through this one, because on fight night, Barberena had other plans. Displaying incredible resilience and heart, he weathered Northcutt's early pressure and used the clinch to sap on Northcutt's explosive energy. Despite the first round being competitive, it did seem like Super Sage was the more tired of the two coming into the second round, and a sloppy head kick saw Northcutt grounded. Barberena began to expose Northcutt's defenses, raining down on him with solid ground and pound before finding his way to the submission before the round was out. It was a loss that certainly brought Sage Northcutt back down to earth, and in many ways, he never did regain the hype fully after this one. Roxanne Modafferi. Macy Barber had some pretty high aspirations for a fighter who had barely proven themselves in the top flight. Sure, she was a talented fighter who was certainly worth her roster spot, but she'd been talking a big talk, promising the world that she would be the fighter to finally break Jon Jones's unreachable record as the youngest champion in UFC history at 23. Barber still had some time to go when she came up against the pioneer Roxanne Modafferi, but in many ways, it seemed like Roxy was being served on a platter to Barber, as the new young fighter would take the spot of the old, weathered veteran. However, on fight night, things did not go to plan for Barber at all. And after injuring her ACL in the early stages, her limitations were made quite clear as Modafferi began to take over in a big way, utilizing her veteran savvy to pretty handily deal with Barber in every facet of the fight. Sure, Macy has since proven herself to be a better fighter than she showed here, but this was a major lesson for her. Paul Craig. In a high-stakes matchup between Paul Craig and the highly touted prospect Magomed Ankalaev, Craig was considered to be the sacrificial lamb. Ankalaev had an undefeated record and was a formidable force with solid striking, wrestling, and grappling skills. Craig, while talented, was expected to be overpowered by the Russian sensation in what was this highly regarded prospect's first outing as a UFC fighter. And for the first 14 minutes of this 3-round affair, things were going exactly as planned for Ankalaev. But in the dying moments of the 3rd round, Craig pulled off a remarkable comeback. With just 1 second remaining, he secured a triangle choke, forcing Ankalaev to tap out.
Great big triangle setup.
The improbable submission victory proved that anything can happen in MMA and that no fighter should ever be underestimated. It was the latest finish in a 3-round fight at the time. Antonio Silva. When Antonio Silva faced the feared striker Alistair Overeem, he was a pretty huge underdog, and trust us, it was understandable. Overeem was a former K1 champion and had a reputation for his devastating striking power. Silva, while a skilled heavyweight, was expected to be outclassed on the feet and made to look limited by comparison, but Silva displayed tremendous heart and resilience. Despite absorbing punishing blows from Overeem, he weathered the storm and persevered. In the 3rd round, Silva turned the tables with a thunderous flurry, sending Overeem crashing to the canvas. The stunning knockout victory showcased the unpredictability of MMA and the potential for underdogs to rise above the odds. Bigfoot had been unfairly dismissed by Overeem in the build-up too, so when his big moment finally came, you could just tell that he was enjoying every second of it. Overeem did go on to do great things, of course, but this was a sobering moment for anyone who thought that he was going to just run through the entire UFC heavyweight division. Nate Diaz. When the brash and charismatic Conor McGregor faced off against the gritty and durable Nate Diaz, many believed it would be a mere stepping stone on McGregor's path to greatness. Diaz, a last-minute replacement for the 155-pound king Rafael dos Anjos, was not expected to pose much of a threat to the Irish superstar. But Diaz had different plans in mind. In the opening round, McGregor's striking prowess was on full display as he landed heavy shots on Diaz. However, the tide turned in the 2nd round when Diaz found his rhythm and began connecting with his precise boxing. All of a sudden, it became clear that Nate would not fall like the featherweights Conor had been KOing for fun. As the fight progressed, Diaz's relentless pressure and superior ground game put McGregor in unfamiliar territory. In the 2nd round, Diaz stunned McGregor on the feet with a hard shot before forcing him to dive into an ill-advised takedown. Once he made that decision, it was pretty much the final nail in his coffin. A rear-naked choke from the Cesar Gracie black belt followed, and in that moment, an era-defining superstar was born. Seth Petrozelli. In a fight that became an instant MMA legend, Seth Petrozelli stepped up as a last-minute replacement against the formidable Kimbo Slice. Kimbo, a viral street fighting sensation, had built a reputation as an unstoppable force with devastating knockout power and an aura of invincibility. Of course, those in the know realized that Kimbo didn't have the full MMA skill set needed to truly be a threat to the elite of the elite, but at the time, he was supported and revered by legions of fans. Petrozelli, on the other hand, was a relative unknown and was not expected to pose a significant threat to the heavily favored Kimbo. But when the cage door closed, Petrozelli seized the opportunity to make history. Unleashing a barrage of strikes, he caught Kimbo off guard and stunned the world by knocking him out in just 14 seconds. This underdog win pretty much killed the Kimbo hype train there and then. He did go on to have decent success here and there, but this was a legendary upset. Tito Ortiz. When Tito Ortiz stepped into the cage against the young and rising star Ryan Bader, many believed it was a strategic move to boost Bader's career. Ortiz, a former longtime 205-pound champion, was considered past his prime, and Bader was expected to capitalize on the opportunity. Tito had fallen far from his days as a breakout star for the UFC, and with the rising talent Bader set to break into title contention before too long, the expectation was that Tito was about to be sent into retirement. But Ortiz had other plans. In a do-or-die fight for his career, he showcased his veteran experience and unyielding determination, tagging Bader hard in one of the opening exchanges, dropping him to the canvas, and giving him the opportunity to lock in a guillotine choke. This victory served as a powerful reminder that anything is possible inside the octagon. Sure, it wasn't a victory that propelled Tito to any form of career comeback, but he flipped the script on Bader and the UFC in a way that was truly surprising. Tim Boetsch. In one of the most improbable comebacks in MMA history, Tim Boetsch shocked the world when he faced the formidable Yushin Okami. Okami, a seasoned veteran with a wealth of experience, was expected to make quick work of Boetsch, who was considered an underdog in their middleweight matchup. Okami had just lost to the champ Anderson Silva, but was expected to recapture his form in there with the overmatched Boetsch. In the first 2 rounds, Okami dominated Boetsch with little issue. However, Boetsch refused to be discouraged. In the third round, with only minutes remaining, Boetsch somehow landed big and completely turned the fight's momentum on its head. All of a sudden, this elite middleweight was hanging on for dear life, and Boetsch sensed it. Before anyone knew what was happening, Tim Boetsch was battering Yushin up against the fence, eventually scoring the KO with the single greatest punch he ever threw. It was one of the all-time great UFC comebacks, and a legendary performance for the veteran Boetsch.